Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to another edition of Talk Back. It's episode 214 of season 2. I am one of your hosts, Eric Nesbit, and across from me is Justin Gay. Justin is our host and director of content, and the reason I bring that up is because if you haven't visited our website, talkbackfantalk.com, and read our biographies, you might not know that I am a co-host and producer of the show, but Justin is our leading man. He's our host and director of content. Justin, I got to give you props because over the last couple of weeks, our listenership is skyrocketing, and I know we think and believe that NFL is king, but it's really showing up in the ways that you've brought the NFL to the show. So it seems to me that our listeners are really enjoying the 4 divisional previews that we've done in the AFC. They gravitated toward that. They knew we did it last year, and now we're doing it again this year. So great job on that. And Justin, as the producer of the show, I'm going to give you free reign tonight. We're going to go all NFC East in segment 1, and then after the break, we're going to go NFC North in segment 2. We're actually going to cut Talkworthy for tonight. There's no NBA action. NASCAR was off this past weekend. Tiger Woods did play the first playoff event on the PGA Tour, finished a kind of middle-of-the-road 40th place. Bryson DeChambeau took the win. Not terribly exciting tournament. Bryson DeChambeau kind of dominated there on the weekend. So Talkworthy, there's not a whole lot to discuss. We got to get these 2 hot divisions in the NFC, my Eagles out of the East, and some big questions surrounding the Vikings and the Packers, even the Bears out of that NFC North. So all of that and more on this edition of Talk Back.
Welcome back to part 3 of our NFL preview series. Tonight, we jump over to the NFC. We finished up with the AFC last week. We talked about a few of the divisions over the last 2 weeks that we felt really wasn't a lot of buzz around, but that sort of changes tonight when we jump into the NFC East. This is a highly touted division. You have last year's reigning Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles. You have a New York team in the Giants. You have America's team in Dallas, and you have the team in the nation's capital, the Washington Redskins, and that's where we'll start this off. Again, if you're first time listening to the show, what we like to do is take one big question from each of these teams, discuss it, then we're going to take the over-under win total that Vegas has set, and Eric and I will debate whether we like that number, if we like the over, under, or in some cases we'll push if we think that we don't feel confident in either one of the numbers. And it's a team that maybe if we were in Vegas laying our money on, we would just stay off of because we don't feel that there's a lot of upside or maybe really downside with some of these teams. So let's kick it off with the Washington Redskins. Eric, last year coming off of a 7-9 season, but they had a major shakeup at the quarterback position. We spent a lot of time on the show last year talking about, did the Washington Redskins make the right move, not signing Kirk Cousins to a long-term deal because we knew he was going to be a highly touted free agent. He didn't stay on the market very long. He was gone. But the Redskins make a surprising move. They go out, make a trade, and bring in Alex Smith from the Kansas City Chiefs. And by all reports, Alex Smith has had a very impressive camp for this team. So, Eric, I got to ask you, we spent a lot of time debating this. Did the Washington Redskins make the right move? Now they've gone out, They gave Alex Smith a 4-year deal. It has about $71 million worth of guarantees in it. So, Eric, are you believing the media hype coming out of Washington that Alex Smith actually gives this Washington Redskin team a better chance to win than Kirk Cousins?
I'm really not sold on it. Obviously, the Minnesota Vikings see something in Kirk Cousins that the Washington Redskins do not. But in that same breath, I've got to give Alex Smith his due because clearly the Washington Redskins see something in him that the Kansas City Chiefs no longer do. And so I think in the long-range picture for all of these quarterbacks, whether it's Alex Smith or, as we'll talk about in a minute, whether it's Kirk Cousins, I think as that carousel finally stopped spinning and each one landed where they needed to be, that probably sets up a brighter future than if they are outstaying their welcome in whatever city that they're in. So, does this make the Washington Redskins better than it did with Kirk Cousins? I really don't know about that, Justin. I mean, Alex Smith is not a bad quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. I think he's a very, very functional quarterback. You and I play fantasy football, and neither one of us are, standing in line to draft Alex Smith from a fantasy perspective. But is he a solid veteran quarterback for the Washington Redskins? Sure, absolutely. Now, I don't think I'm sold on the weapons that he's going to be throwing to. I've always been excited about Reed at tight end, but he just can't seem to stay healthy. Vernon Davis is on the squad, but he's old. And now you've got wide receivers that either need to come into their own this year or really move on. I mean, I think you're going to find that a guy like Crowder, a guy like Doxson, even a guy like Richardson who's been added are going to be pieces that could be very good for the Washington Redskins or could be marginal. And Alex Smith is the kind of quarterback that just can't have marginal targets. He had Tyreek Hill last year, and that was quite helpful. Finally, the Kansas City Chiefs were able to score touchdowns out of the wide receiver position, which they weren't able to do the year before, which we talked about was just absolutely bizarre. So Alex Smith has a few targets. I'm not sure what they're going to do at running back, especially with guys hurting his knee, bringing in Adrian Peterson. It just seems like, to me, Justin, the offense isn't solidified enough to make a veteran like Alex Smith be the star of that team that's necessary to go up against a Giants and Dallas and ultimately Eagles roster that I think is the reason that Vegas is probably starting out with them in last place in this division.
Let me ask you this, Eric. What do you think Adrian Peterson has left in the tank?
Oh, based on what we've seen in a preseason game, I think he still has some pops. But does that last all season? I don't know. Is he the answer ultimately for the Washington Redskins? I don't know about that either. I think if he stays healthy, he's very, very good, but he's not as good and certainly not setting them up for a future the way that some of these other guys would have. So it's just a bad place for the Redskins to have to look right from the start of the season, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't think Adrian Peterson is a long-term solution at all. I think once Geis comes back next year, I don't even see them bringing Peterson back into the fold. But back to the initial question I asked you on Alex Smith, every time there is a training camp, there's a lot of PR that comes out of it, and you're never really sure what you're seeing. If you believe Josh Norman, Alex Smith has been picking this defense apart. Now, does that say more about Alex Smith or more about the Redskins defense? Those are the type of things we don't know. Alex Smith didn't look very good this past week in week 3 of the preseason versus Denver. But again, it's preseason. There's a lot of things to work out on this team, and I think you hit on a lot of them, Eric, when you talked about this offense. And there's a lot of questions about this offense. Number one, it starts with Jordan Reed. Can he stay on the field for a significant amount of time? He always seems to get nicked up, and it's not one thing. It is a litany of injuries that he has, and you almost have to expect, even if you draft fantasy at this point, Jordan Reed's value continues to drop year after year, no matter how productive he is, because as a fantasy owner, he's going to end up missing potentially half the season. And I think Washington knows that as well, which is why they do have Vernon Davis at least as a backup. Crowder's another guy that has kind of gotten himself nicked up. Josh Doxson is kind of going to get his first real chance to go out and perform for this team. And then they bring in Paul Richardson. So there is a ton of questions. There's a tremendous amount of upside for this offense. That's the one thing that they do have. There is a ton of upside, but there's also the chance that a lot of these pieces and parts may not work out. The one thing I'll say, though, about Alex Smith is I actually agree with the move because it didn't feel like Kirk Cousins was going anywhere. It almost felt like they had hit their ceiling. If you look back at their their records, it's always been hovering right there around 500. And being in the Washington market, being able to watch the Redskins on regional coverage literally every week. I've talked about before, my brother is a Redskins season ticket holder. We watch a lot of games together. Kirk Cousins has a lot of Tony Romo in him. And I say that because Tony Romo was a guy that would have 350 yards and 3 touchdowns and 1 pick, and the Cowboys would lose, and people would throw it and blame it on someone else. Well, when you watch those games and you weren't just watching highlights and you weren't just reading stat sheets, you would see a easy third down conversion that Romo missed and a bad interception late in a drive. And then the defense would get burnt and they would get to blame. Cousins did a lot of that. A lot of ineffective play in the fourth quarter, a lot of late bad interceptions that cost them chances to win football games. So I think for Washington, look, they didn't believe in him. They probably got themselves a discount in Alex Smith. We talked about it last week with the Chiefs, that even though they're going to Mahomes and long-term, he's probably the more effective option. Alex Smith could have probably won more regular season games for the Chiefs this year. And I think with Washington, Eric, he's got a chance to do that. I think that they have a chance to win more games with Alex Smith this year than they did last year. And that's where Vegas has set the number at. Vegas has the over-under at 7, the exact number of games Washington won last year, Eric. So are you going over, under, or push on this one?
Justin, I'll tell you where I'm struggling with the number 7 as it relates to the Washington Redskins, and it's this schedule that I'm looking at because of the South. And what I mean by that is the AFC South and the NFC South. The schedule is really, really ripe with losses if I'm a Washington Redskins fan. And you throw in then a random game against Green Bay. You know, I don't know, Justin. I don't know if I can get myself to 7. I'm going to take the under. And that's not because of Alex Smith. I think you made a lot of good points as it relates to Alex Smith. So I don't think we can heap blame on him at the end of the season if they don't get to the over. I think we can heap blame on the schedule. And I think we can blame the fact that we're just not sure where the ceiling is for this offense when they're going to be playing games with Green Bay and New Orleans, Carolina, Atlanta, Jacksonville, Houston, and then throw in all the games against the NFC East, which, by the way, is going to be a very good division again. I don't know that I can get to 7.
Well, after I hyped them up, I think I have to take the over, and I'll do that. I think they will find a way to get over 7. I think when you look at that schedule, we talked about some of the teams in the South. That's a deep division where all of those teams have a chance to be pretty good, but I don't think we took any of them to be juggernauts. We even sort of struggled to find the wins that would get even Jacksonville up over 10 wins. So I don't think that there's juggernauts there, and I think if they play well at home and they can find a way to win some on the road, they can find a way to win 8 games and potentially even more. They made some nice adjustments as well on the defensive side of the football. Got 2 Alabama guys in the last 2 drafts to solidify themselves up front. So I think they find a way to get to 8. I think it's a pretty good roster. Again, I'm going to take the upside on the wide receivers. Jamison Crowder is a very underrated slot receiver who is a guy that's a pretty good target for fantasy because he normally goes a little bit later. He gets a ton of targets, and I think he'll be a guy that Alex Smith likes because we know Smith likes to sort of dink and dunk the ball at times, and then I think he'll take his shots deep to Richardson and Doxson. So I'm going to go just slightly over with Washington. Let's go over to the New York Giants, Eric, a team last year that almost made me pull my hair out because I thought that they were going to have a much better year, but I had good company with me because there was a lot of people that had high expectations for this Giants team. They fell well short of all those expectations, only winning 3 games. Now, they had a ton of injuries. They also had a mess at the head coaching position. They got rid of Ben McAdoo, who decided for some reason to break Eli Manning's streak to take a look at Geno Smith, which I could have told him what that was going to look like. He's not even in town anymore. They had the number 2 pick in this past draft. They decided not to go with a quarterback. They decided to stick with Eli Manning for the future and to go with Saquon Barkley. So we know the Giants, one of their major holes has been their run game. It has been disastrous over the past few years, not to mention their offensive line has been a mess, which they did address during free agency. So now they go out to the draft. They take Saquon Barkley, who many thought was the most complete running back in this draft, one of the best prospects we've seen in a very long time. They'll team him up with Odell Beckham Jr., Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram. Got a lot of young weapons on that offensive side of the football. But does it make a difference, Eric? Does it make the Giants a contender again in the NFC East?
Yes, I think it does. I think you would be better off being high on them this year than last year, because I think if Saquon